How do you push past the sheer terror of sharing your naked feelings when you have been devastated or humiliated for doing so in the past? It's a good question, and I have 3 more questions in response. Number 1, what are you trying to share? Number 2, who are you trying to share with? And number 3, the most important question, why? Why are you leaning into emotional vulnerability, and what's the outcome that you're secretly hoping for? It might be a controversial thing to say, but I no longer see a social stigma around emotional vulnerability or talking about mental health challenges in the society that we live in. Think about it. It's not a lack of encouragement, and it's not a lack of example setting by celebrities or admirable figures which we're lacking. It's never been more encouraged, from birth all through school and in the adult workplace, to open up and talk. Anyone under the age of 40 has grown in that environment where we're consistently encouraged to share what's on our hearts. So what's not working? Why is this not enough, and what are we potentially missing out on? Crucially, is the power in healing silence? Because let's think about this for a moment. Is every man or woman who chooses not to share what's going on inside automatically bundled into a self-shaming category of repressing everything that they're feeling and being cold and emotionally unavailable? Or might there be a higher level of maturity where we pre-process emotions rather than sharing naked feelings? We discern who we should share with based on their genuine level of consciousness and emotional capacity, or maybe we just keep it to ourselves, not because of shame, but because we've got the internal resources to be able to self-process, and we don't need to go and seek everyone as our therapist or potential mommy, daddy, surrogate figure. It's a complex topic, but let's lay it out in the broad 3-stage process, because this will frame the rest of the conversation. Stage 1 is the repressive stage. And this is the classic position where someone literally bottles up all their feelings. They want to share with their partner or maybe at their workplace, and they just keep it all in, and then they develop addictions and heart attacks and all of these problems. We know that. That's not too interesting. It's obvious. Stage 2, the person progresses very naturally to opening up. They share with a loved one. They share with their employer. They share with whoever, ideally a therapeutic support. And it becomes a catharsis. They unburden themselves from all of that damage and all of that trauma. And yet that's not the case, because you can't unburden yourself of all of the damage and all of the trauma through conversations with most people. It actually requires introspection. And this is the challenge that we don't see when it comes to the conversation around emotional vulnerability. I'm going to be addressing the actual question itself in a moment, but let's frame this properly. Stage 1 is here. Stage 2 is here. People at stage 2 who haven't seen stage 3 will think I'm talking about this. I'm talking about this. It's in the same territory, but it's a different level of elevation or a different level of depth. When I'm saying stay silent and process internally, do not mistake me for saying repress and bottle down. What I'm actually inviting is a shift from stage 2, opening up to many people, to stage 3, which is closing off to many people and being incredibly discerning and potentially going through a stage of healing silence. Because that is the powerful next step. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, people who are here and have not fully grounded into the dead end experience of, I'm actually not healing anymore from looping around and potentially trauma dumping, and my friends don't seem to enjoy the fact that I'm talking about these issues all the time. Maybe something else needs to happen. They think the only option potentially is go back to stage 1 and just shut up. That's not the point. The point is to elevate to stage 3, which is healing silence. Because let's unpack this question. There's often this topic of shame and naked feelings and devastation and humiliation. They're all loaded into this question, which is a really good question. It's so concise. And if you want to get involved in the series, please put a comment down below. This is what this channel is all about right now. Naked feelings. Why? Why your naked feelings? Why not process them a little bit? Why not go to the journal? Why not get it to the point where you have as minimal emotional charge as possible, and then go to the conversational partner when necessary, if necessary? Something that I realize in working one-to-one with people is often we'll do some trauma work around, let's say, a father issue or a mother issue. And these are normally people who are in their 30s, maybe even in their 40s, and their parents are quite old or maybe no longer even on this earth. That makes it easier because then there's actually not the conversation that sometimes needs to happen. But the mistake is to think that because you've done the internal processing or because it's important to you, that you automatically need to have that conversation with someone else. In some circumstances, this is necessary. It's a complex topic, but we don't have enough conversation around the moment where it's necessary and advisable, and in fact, far more healing to keep it to yourself. You don't need to tell your mom about what she did and why that hurt you. You don't need to tell your brother about what he did and why that hurt you. At a certain moment you might, but fundamentally it's your internal experience at a psychological level which requires the healing process. And there's only so much externalization. There's only so many conversations that you can have with genuinely supportive friends and loved ones before you reach that natural endpoint and you realize, there's no external answer. There's no external advice, and although it's very healing to be in community and very emotionally supportive to get a hug, you're really on your own. And that doesn't need to be isolating and devastating. It can be quite nourishing when you realize that you're alone with yourself and with your own soul if you've made contact at that level. That's where the healing power arrives. It's why we call it self-healing. Intentional silence. Because how do you avoid the devastation and the humiliation of sharing with people who won't understand? You realize that they don't need to understand. You don't need to reveal your true feelings to everyone all the time. And you don't even need to reveal towards the truth of your feelings towards most people most of the time. This isn't to be confused with repression, but it's definitely not to be stuck in this stage 2 moment of thinking it's always okay to share what's on your heart, because it's not. And that's also okay. The pendulum has swung perhaps a little bit too far, especially when it comes to men. And I'm going to lean into men. I know not every man who watches this video is going to agree with me, and maybe the women who are watching this video will heavily disagree with me. But there's something that I've realized in working with men one-to-one in their trauma healing space. They need action, and they don't actually want to loop around on talking about the emotions all that much at all. At the very start of working with men one-to-one, I used to think that the more feminine way of relating, the way of speaking heart to heart and going through in that circular motion was what men needed. And they do, to some degree, at a certain stage. But men bond through action. Primarily the masculine psychology is oriented towards internal as externalized, which means that when it comes to trauma work, men want to fix and problem solve. And this is misunderstood in the healing space, because it's very easy perhaps for a female healer or a female therapist to think that the man is being emotionally cold and he just doesn't want to open up. The reality is, he does, but he also wants something to do once he's opened up. This is something that's really misunderstood, and it's why I want to share it. For most men, and I've realized this in my own experience, in my close male friends and in the clients I've worked with in trauma healing space, when they open up and share their naked feelings, that's an immediate liberation, but they don't want to remain naked forever. They don't want to go out into the world being naked because they're vulnerable. They want to have a persona that works for them. They want to have a healthy ego, and they want to have a structure and a strategy and an action plan to improve their relationships, to improve their work, to heal the trauma of the past and actually make a difference in the tangible world. Women want this too. Of course, women and men, we share many similarities in the trauma healing space. But the key distinction is that often for the female clients that I work with, they have a different response. The circular moment of going all the way through can often be the healing by itself. Just talking, it's why in the classic relationship dating advice, it's sometimes a case of men want to fix and women want to be heard. When women share trauma, they want to be heard and they also want to be fixed, and it's in proportion. But it's not fixing as an external agent. I'm not trying to fix the woman or fix the man who's in front of me. But there's an internal feeling of fixing yourself, which is often thrown all the way into the self-development bin when it comes to the healing space, because we think that emotional processing is the God above gods, and this circular way of relating is how the world should meet us. But it is just not the case. With a therapist, sure, they're going to help you through those circles and it is the appropriate context. But with most romantic partners, with most family members, and most people at your workspace, they're not trained to be able to do the circular looping around, and every time you loop around, you leave a little bit of baggage and it falls down towards the chasms of the healing river that washes it all away. Most people are linear. Most people, healthily, it's not a toxic word to be linear, goal-directed, moving forwards, going through an action. That's not actually most people. I was wrong with my language. That's most environmental contexts. In relationship, at a workplace, there are tasks and the responsibilities mean that it's not appropriate to loop around on the emotions as actually an outcome. Do we do this project? Yes or no? You can share a bit of your emotions around it, but it's not appropriate to bring it out all the way. But what about romantic relationships? How does this all tie in? Let's talk about that element of devastation and humiliation. In a single sentence, if you're with a romantic partner who devastates and humiliates you for sharing your emotions, leave the fucking relationship. It's obvious. Set up a boundary. It's not working. Give it many, many, many months of trying. And if it's not working still, leave the relationship. Of course, apply discernment. If you are consistently getting gaslit or belittled or given the cold shoulder and they're not responding to conscious communication, it's time to let it go. If you're in a situation where it feels like humiliation, but what's actually happening is a sense of, it's not really a humiliating experience. They actually just said, I don't know about that. I don't see it that way. Aren't you overreacting? If it's a woman sharing with a man, that's going to be a pretty common experience. He's not trying to humiliate you, he just doesn't understand. Consider that. Consider that he's not trying to get you. He's not actually out to get you. He loves you, he cares about you, he wants to make it work. But for him, the way that you shared that energy, the way that you shared that problem, didn't quite register and he needs some more information. I'm not going to go into all the examples of how you can linguistically frame the problems, but the default assumption, surely, if it's a friend or a loved one or a romantic partner, is that they love you, they care about you, and they want you to be healthy and happy. So if it feels humiliating when they're responding to you in a certain way, maybe they are genuinely being humiliating, but maybe there's a bit of emotional unsafety that indicates a pre-processing is required. This is the overspill of intensity, which I've talked about on this channel before. If you're going into the conversation and you are foaming and frothing and erupting from beneath your eyes and out of your mouth, and it's all there, and you sit down and you're like, bleh, like this, you've just emotionally vomited on the person who cares about you, and no matter how calm and conscious they are, they're likely to just go, what the fuck? Why did you do that? It's a normal human response. If you frame the conversation in advance, hey, I'd like to share this thing with you, and you're really grounded and you're really calm in the way that you enter into the conversation, you are much less likely to receive a backlash of devastation and humiliation. But of course, if the relationship is truly unworkable, then just leave. Just leave. Just hold the boundary. Where do we take this in a practical sense if we're working in that in-between stage? Let's recap. Stage 1, repression, bottling it up. Stage 2, societally encouraged, everyone shares. Stage 3, what if it's the mature response to not share sometimes? Where does that leave us? It leaves us with a potential of stage 4, which is taking the stage 3 awareness, having learnt the limitations of stage 1 and stage 2, and then you get to the natural point when your journaling is no longer that rewarding, when you've got real conversations that need to be had, but you are grounded and you're literally in control. Not in a rigid, kind of like anxious state where you're trying to control people's outcomes. You're actually free of outcome. That's when you know you're ready for stage 4. If you're at the point where, let's say, you're having a difficult emotional conversation with someone who in the past has humiliated you for sharing something really vulnerable, and you've done all your work around that, maybe you have a therapist that you've spoken through these issues with, maybe you have a body worker and you've done the somatic elements that have released the trauma from your system, you can then go to that person at stage 4, which is distinct from stage 2, because stage 2 is the unprocessed naked emotions which you share potentially with less discernment than would be advisable. Stage 4 is realizing you don't need to share all that much, but there's maybe a few sentences and a few practical outcomes that will be required. I hope that this spiral is clear for you. We go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and potentially we come back to stage 5, which is ever more refined, and it keeps continuing all the way up. It's silence and speaking all the way up and turtles all the way down, and that's the ultimate message of this video. I'm not going to give you the advice of how do you overcome the sheer terror, because even the phrasing of how do I push past that indicates that there's overexertion. You're overexerting through a boundary in a way where you're going to naturally create a combat dynamic which will lead to even more backlash. So why do it? Why push through someone's defenses to assert your emotional vulnerability like an emotional marauder who's going out there and pillaging your vulnerability straight into somebody's awareness? I'm not saying that's what anyone's doing in particular, but it's a potential risky territory when it comes to that kind of language. You're asserting your trauma, and that's going to create a response where you're more likely to receive more hostility in return. See how much you can do by yourself. See how much you can do with professional support, and at that point, go to the person that you need to speak to, and you won't necessarily be sharing your naked feelings. You'll be sharing your true feelings, but you'll know how much to share. You'll have the appropriate level of intensity, and I guarantee, I see this time and time again, I guarantee that if you've spent a few hours properly working through something before sending that voice note, or before having that coffee conversation with someone who you're having difficulty with, all you can do is lean back, and occasionally you'll have a slight leaning forwards. If this is +5 all the way into like pillaging through, and this is -5, I'm literally leaving and avoiding the conversation, you'll go into +1, or maybe -1, or +1, or -1, and you will gradually shift, but still remain on your 2 feet. And I'll bring it back to center. I hope this helps. I'm not giving a specific answer, but I hope that the framing is useful, because there is too much blind encouragement of emotional vulnerability, which misses out on the nuance of emotional self-processing before becoming vulnerable. This is how we have more conscious conversations. Trauma dumping need not continue. And although it's important to share, and I don't want anyone to come away from this video thinking that they have to repress into stage 1 shameful silencing, there is a higher level of silence which is very intentional, and it has a very soulful element which I wish more people understood, because it's very healing, and it's truly, truly worth exploring when it comes to your next difficult conversation. So I hope this helped, and the very next video in the series, I'm actually going to be bringing through my top books of the year. It's a bit of a special end of the year episode. Read over 130 books. Here's the top 12. I'll see you over there.